The bias facing is an excellent way to either hem curves or finish any garment edge. It's finished from both sides, and it's a lot easier than it looks. We have a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. I've cut a 2-inch wide strip on the bias to make the bias facing. So to prepare, we're going to fold it wrong sides together after first relaxing the bias. Hold it wrong sides together. Pressing lengthwise along the bias strip. This is step 1. So this is the result. And now, what we want to do is we want to press this strip to match the curve on our sample. And you can go a little more extreme if you need to. You can always flatten it out later. Right side of the fabric. There you have it. Back from the pressing table, we're going to pin the bias strip to the garment. Now, I'm using 3/8 inch seam allowances on this. We want a narrow seam allowance, so I like to turn this over, and we're going to match the raw edges of the bias strip with the raw edges of the seam allowance. Now, when you're working with bias, sometimes it's a good idea to stay this with some interfacing. But this fabric is fairly dense, so it's not going to stretch or distort. But still, I like to have the fabric side up and the bias strip down, where the bias strip will be against the feed. So this is all pinned together. We're ready to go to the sewing machine. So now we will sew at 3/8 of an inch. There we are. Our next step is at the work table. Now this is a cheat. This is a wavy rotary cutter blade. You could use a pinking shear. But when you have a seam allowance that you want to turn, a curved seam allowance that you want to turn smoothly, it's good to trim it down with a pinking shear or a pinking blade. That's what it will look like. Our next step is the pressing table. As we do all seams, press as sewn, and using the toe of the sleeve board, press the seam allowances towards the strip. Be careful not to stretch the fold. You just want to press right at the edge, just at the seam. Just want to bend that towards the bias strip. So that is what we have here. Next, we turn it right side out and press. Now it's right side out, and you can steam it and use the pressing block, or you can steam it and place the iron down on it. I'm just shaping it a little bit before I commit, and then steam and press with the clapper. Now, if this were a thin fabric, you could just actually press it with the iron. But since this is a wool, I don't want to leave too harsh of a crease on this. So there we have it. This is what it looks like from the front. This is what it looks like from the back. Now we'll take this over to the work table and hem it with the blind hem. So as you can see, I thread basted everything in place before I started hemming, but I want to comment on the pressing. When you press, if you press the seam allowances all towards the bias strip, what will happen automatically is that the seam allowance will favor. You don't want to have this seam sitting right on the edge. Having it favor back by, it's about 1/8 of an inch, is considered good form, because then from the front side, it reads just as a folded edge, not a bound edge. So here, as you can see, I'm working away. And this is a blind hem. Notice I'm sewing about 1/8 of an inch in from the fold. You don't want to sew it right at the fold because the stitches will read. If you have this coming, if you have the needle running, I'd say about 1/8 of an inch below the fold, you don't want, when you run this like so, because you can see I make mistakes too, you just want the needle to pass through the back, not the front. And then you can come here and you can just pick up just one yarn of fabric. So that's the classic blind hem. And when you're pulling the stitches, don't pull them too tightly, because then that would leave puckers. I will take this off camera and finish hemming, and I will bring back the result. So here is the result. Bias facing. Now you notice from the front, you don't see any of the stitches. And that is really the object of this. When you hem it properly, you really shouldn't, either you shouldn't see, or you'd have a minimal show through, depending on the fabric. So there we have it. Bias facing.